DeepSeek's own founder privately told investors that China is losing the AI race. Months later, his company shipped a model that genuinely rivals Kimi K3 and comes close to Claude. Both things are true, and Elon Musk has an opinion about which one matters more. 2 moments, months apart. A leaked investor call from China's most watched AI founder, admitting the gap is real. And the arrival of DeepSeek V4 Flash, a model that finally forced US labs to take the price war seriously. This isn't a China wins story or a China loses story. It's the more useful version. What the founder actually admitted, what the new model actually does, and what Musk and Anthropic's own CEO said once they saw it. The man running China's most watched AI lab told investors, in private, that China is losing. Then the model his own team shipped almost proved him wrong. Liang Wenfeng, a mathematics prodigy from Guangdong, co-founder of the quant hedge fund Highflyer, and one of the lowest-profile major AI founders on Earth. He almost never speaks publicly. Highflyer funded DeepSeek's AI lab starting in 2023, without the pressure of needing quick commercial returns, the patience that let DeepSeek spend a year on foundational research while competitors chased product launches. In January 2025, DeepSeek's R1 model triggered what commentators called a Sputnik moment for US AI. An open, low-cost model that wiped out close to $1 trillion in tech stock value in a single day. Since then, Liang has said almost nothing publicly. Which is exactly why a leaked, unscripted 4-hour conversation from him was always going to be a bigger story than anything he'd say in an interview. May 20th, 2026. A closed-door investor meeting, as DeepSeek prepared for a future round. No press, no recording ever meant to leave that room. 2 months later, on July 25th, a detailed summary of that meeting, reportedly 118 points long, started circulating on Chinese social media. Liang's private remarks were suddenly very public. The core admission, China is still lagging behind the United States in AI sophistication, and DeepSeek itself remains heavily dependent on Nvidia chips, despite years of US export controls meant to prevent exactly that. One caveat worth being upfront about: this transcript hasn't been officially authenticated by DeepSeek. Multiple outlets treat it as credible, Bloomberg broke it, and Liang's own reaction is part of the evidence, but treat the specific wording with some caution. According to the reporting, Liang described obtaining certain processors he called non-compliant, and said DeepSeek was receiving fewer Huawei chips than China's largest internet companies, despite the export squeeze on Nvidia. The transcript reportedly claims DeepSeek has deployed 16,000 Huawei Ascend 950 chips, arranged in a configuration Liang claimed could substitute for Nvidia's most advanced GB200 and GB300 hardware. He also reportedly discussed breaking dependence on Nvidia's CUDA software ecosystem entirely, the software moat that's kept most of the AI industry locked into Nvidia hardware for a decade. And 2 months before it happened, Liang reportedly predicted the next wave of Chinese AI price competition, effectively forecasting the exact price war his own company's next model would help start. None of this reads as villainous. It reads as an unusually candid engineer, talking to a room he thought was private, being honest about real constraints. But once it was public, the reaction wasn't about the content, it was about the leak. DeepSeek had a second funding round in motion, targeting a pre-money valuation of roughly 480 billion yuan, about $71 billion. Days after the leak went viral, Liang verbally told prospective backers to hold off. Reporting is clear on the reason. Liang wasn't upset that he'd said China was behind. He was furious a private, unscripted conversation had been turned into a public document without his permission. That first round, closed in June, had already valued DeepSeek between $50 and $52 billion, backed by Tencent, CATL, and China's National AI Industry Investment Fund. The second round would have stepped that up by more than a third. The fallout went beyond DeepSeek's cap table. U.S. officials and members of Congress had spent months alleging Chinese AI firms were bypassing chip export controls. This leak read, to them, like confirmation. Whether or not every number in that transcript is precisely accurate, the broader claim, that Chinese labs are finding workarounds to Nvidia's export restrictions, is no longer just a Washington talking point. It's coming from inside the room. One detail reportedly stung the most. By his own account, Liang doesn't believe DeepSeek is actually ahead. That's not spin from a rival lab. That's the founder's own private assessment. That's the confession. Here's what shipped months later. July 31st, 2026, days after the leak was still dominating headlines. DeepSeek quietly published the official version of V4 Flash. It arrived slightly behind DeepSeek's own mid-July target, and without the more powerful V4 Pro upgrade people expected alongside it. V4 Pro is still not officially out. The detail that matters most: DeepSeek says the architecture is identical to April's preview. Every performance gain came entirely from additional post-training, not a bigger model underneath. That preview version had already been the single most used model on OpenRouter for 7 consecutive weeks, before the official release even shipped. Under the hood, 284 billion total parameters, only 13 billion active per token, a 1 million token context window, and compatibility with both OpenAI style and Anthropic style APIs. The number that broke through. DeepSeek charges 28 cents for the same volume of output that cost $25 on Claude Opus 4.8. Roughly an 89-fold gap. Axios reported that on complex coding and autonomous software tasks, V4 Flash performs close to Claude Opus 4.8, and on Arena.ai's crowdsourced front-end coding leaderboard, it actually debuted ahead of it. Worth knowing, DeepSeek never claimed to beat Opus 4.8. Opus 4.8 shipped after V4. Any headline saying V4 beats Opus 4.8 is a third party's comparison, not DeepSeek's own claim. V4 Flash didn't land in a vacuum. Days earlier, Moonshot AI's Kimi K3 had already rewritten expectations for what an open-weight Chinese model could do. Fortune reported that Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei hadn't expected a Chinese lab to approach the US's best models for at least 6 more months. Elon Musk guessed it might happen by the first quarter of next year. Kimi K3 blew up both timelines. Chinese AI is now, in Fortune's words, cheap enough and good enough that US startups and Fortune 500 companies are quietly plugging these models into their own operations to rein in spiraling AI budgets. But here's where it gets genuinely interesting. A stricter benchmark aggregator shows Claude Opus 4.8 still leading V4 Flash by 10 to 31 points across 5 shared evaluations. Same 2 models, very different story, depending whose numbers you trust. One independent tracker even puts DeepSeek's V4 Pro at rank 35 on the Code Arena leaderboard, behind other Chinese models like GLM 5.1 and Kimi K2.6, let alone Kimi K3. One hands-on test building a real back-end application put V4 Pro in the middle, ahead of Kimi K2.6, behind Opus 4.7. V4 Flash scored lower, and its build actually failed, but V4 Flash did it for 2 cents. Roughly a 14th the cost of Kimi K2.6 and a 90th the cost of Opus 4.7, for a worse, but not catastrophic result. And Kimi K3's own headline numbers hide a catch. Dropping its reasoning effort from max to low crashed its ARC-AGI2 score from over 60% to under 13. The comparable to Claude claim depends entirely on the settings. So is V4 Flash comparable to Kimi K3 and Claude? On price, decisively yes. On raw capability, depending on the benchmark and the settings, genuinely too close to call one way. Which brings us to the question everyone actually wants answered. Does any of this mean China wins the AI race? Elon Musk has weighed in more than once. In an interview with The Economist, Musk said China has a strong chance of being, in his words, the leaders at some point, pointing specifically to its electricity generation capacity and projected growth in computing power. His reasoning wasn't about chips at all, it was about power. Training and running frontier AI takes enormous continuous electricity, and Musk argued China's build-out capacity there may end up mattering more than export controls on any single chip. Worth flagging, this specific pickup comes through CGTN, a Chinese state broadcaster, citing the original Economist interview. The underlying quote is consistent with Musk's other public comments on the topic, but consider the source when you see it reshared. Musk has been consistent about this elsewhere too. Responding to a user on X in March, he predicted, Google wins the AI race in the West, China wins it on Earth broadly, and SpaceX wins it in space. On a podcast around the same time, he went further. Based on current trends, he said, China will far exceed the rest of the world in AI compute, and it will figure out the chips, export controls or not. None of that is Musk saying DeepSeek's model is better than Claude today. It's Musk saying the long-term trend line worries him more than any single benchmark. Before you take any single headline from this story at face value, a few honest caveats. When the V4 preview first shipped back in April, one China and tech fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations was blunt. It wasn't competitive with frontier US models and didn't meaningfully close the gap. That assessment was about the April preview, not July's release, and V4 Flash's post-training gains and Kimi K3's benchmarks are real. But it's a useful check against any claim that China has simply caught up. Most serious analysts still say it hasn't, not fully. And remember Scene 12, the leak itself is reported, not officially confirmed by DeepSeek. Treat the specific chip numbers and quotes as credible reporting, not a verified transcript. The honest version of this story isn't China caught up, or China is fake. It's a very good, very cheap model shipped months after its own founder admitted, in private, the gap is still real, and the trend line is what has Musk's attention, not this week's benchmark. The most convincing case for how far behind China's AI industry still is didn't come from Washington. It came from the one person on Earth with every reason to say otherwise. A leaked admission of the gap, a paused funding round, a new model that wins decisively on price and only sometimes on capability. And the world's most public tech founder saying the real threat is years away, not this week's release. All of that is true, at the same time. That's rarely how these stories get told. Full source list, every quote, and every benchmark are linked in the description. Subscribe if you want the next one when this story moves again, and it will.